What I would like to say is I've known Joanne for quite some time, and actually met Joanne when I was newly diagnosed. And we started an organization called Stand for Duchenne. And I met Joanne through some pharma folks that I had known at the time, and I worked in the pharma industry. And she's just an incredible human. I think we're going to use that term now for everybody. And she's done a lot of work in the advocacy area. I have just recently met Lauren, but she's incredible as well. We have been working with this organization. They've helped us with some of our work that we have been doing in the light of vamorolone and ensuring that our voices are being part of this decision-making that's happening right now with vamorolone. So I'm really excited to have you both up here today to share some knowledge with our families, put it all into perspective, and also talk about where we, as an organization, but also as individuals, can bring some advocacy to this work. So thank you both.
Government process, woo! What a follow-up. Okay. I think all right, just figure the technology out first, always the fun part. There we go. Okay. All right, so wow. Incredible. So much, in that presentation. Rachel, what a story. And everyone in this room, I know, has a story just like that. Certainly so many decisions need to be made, in your lives. And there's so much to understand, so much that is thrown at you that you need to consume and make sense of. And that, as Rachel was saying, often leads us to feel a little powerless. We feel like we're losing control. It's not until we do understand and we're able to, share our stories effectively that we really regain some of that power and some of that control. And that's a lot about what we're going to talk about today, just, starting this discussion about advocacy. And helping you to feel a little bit more empowered, at a certain time in your life. Now, what we're going to talk about today, it's a lot, and I know that this information may not be useful to all of you right now. You may not be ready for it right now, but the good news is I think we're capturing this on video, so people will be able to watch it later at a time in their lives when it is going to be useful to them. So I just want to thank Nicola and everybody at Defeat Duchenne Canada for inviting us here today to talk about drug access and advocacy. This is going to be the first of 3 presentations that we're going to be able to give, which is fantastic because there's a lot to cover. And we're talking about the processes that are involved in Canada, from drug approval to drug access when patients actually get access to medication, and that is on the public reimbursement side as well as a little bit on the private reimbursement side. So let's get started. So here we have our agenda, and these are the topics that we're going to cover. My colleague Lauren and I, and yes, you have to have curly hair to work for us, with us. We're going to take you through both those processes, and we apologize in advance. There's going to be a lot of acronyms, okay? A lot of letters that you may not be familiar with, but we wanted to share them with you so that when you do hear them or see them, they're going to mean something. And as you can see at the end, we've got some time for a Q&A, and so if you think of any questions as we go, please just note them down, and then we'll be able to cover them hopefully at the end, okay? So let's start with an overview or a snapshot of the journey that a drug takes from the time it's submitted to Health Canada until it gets into patients' hands. So there are a lot of steps you can see. The big sort of lavender colored boxes are the big processes, and you'll see that only one of them is in a turquoise box, and that's because this is the only formal opportunity for input by patients, caregivers, clinicians into any of these processes, either on the public or the private side. Okay, so we're going to walk through all of these. But first, just let's look at the different ways that you're able to access medication in this country. All right. As you just saw on the previous slide, once a drug is approved in Canada, there are 3 possible pathways to access it. You've got the public pathway, which is when government-funded drug plans cover some or all of a medication. Okay, some or all, not always all. You've got the private pathway, which is when a employer-sponsored private plan covers, again, some or all of a medication. And then third, you have out-of-pocket, and that's when we, as patients or families, have to pay for a medication. Now, this isn't really a possibility with higher cost drugs for rare diseases, and so that's why we rely on these other pathways to help us out. I have some water.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're going to walk through all of these pathways, but I will say that there is one other pathway, and that is compassionate access. And so you may have heard of that, and that is when a drug is approved in this country, and maybe you've been on a clinical trial, and the manufacturer will provide you with free access to medication until there is another way of getting it covered, okay? So we're going to walk through the public pathway in detail, and we are going to also touch on the private pathway. But first, let's start with Health Canada review. So I'm just going to take a sip of water. All right. So Health Canada reviews a drug to assess 3 things: safety, efficacy, and quality. It begins when the manufacturer files something called a new drug submission, and then Health Canada must accept that new drug submission in order to begin their process. There are 3 timelines under which Health Canada does its work. They're here on the screen. The third one, and the quickest one, is called priority review, and most drugs for rare diseases will go through that process, okay? At the conclusion of the review, the manufacturer is issued one of 2 things: a notice of compliance or a notice of compliance with conditions. And that just means that Health Canada requires some additional data that the manufacturer can provide after the fact, but they don't want to hold it up, so they approve the drug. Now, it's important to note that there is no formal mechanism for input into this process by patients or caregivers, families at all, okay? Not to say you can't do it, but there isn't a formal opportunity. So it's also possible that a drug might be withdrawn from Health Canada if more study needs to be done. That happens, not often, but it could be the case. And importantly, once a drug is approved by Health Canada, it's able to be sold here. And usually availability happens pretty soon after it's approved. Okay, so today we're talking about how patients access approved drugs, but I will note that once a drug is approved, the Special Access Program, which you may have heard about, isn't accessible to us anymore. And so we can't get a drug through that pathway through Health Canada. We need to shift focus to looking for private or public coverage. Okay? So let's talk really quickly about drug pricing. This is going to be the super boring part, but I'll just say that there is sort of like a watchdog agency that takes a look at how drugs are being priced in this country. It's called PMPRB, and compares the drug price to other countries. And if they see that, the price that is being charged is excessive, they will, speak to the manufacturer about that and make some changes. The main reason why I'm mentioning drug pricing and PMPRB is because an incredible thing happened over the last 6 years from an advocacy perspective. So 6 years ago, PMPRB announced some new guidelines. Many patient groups like this one, rose up and said, no, I'm sorry, those are not good. Those are not good enough for us. And so a considerable amount of advocacy happened over the last 5 years. And in June, some new guidelines were finally posted, and they will come into effect on January 1st. And so it's just an important reason to acknowledge the fact that advocacy makes a difference. People had no idea that PMPR existed. They didn't understand drug pricing. But when patient groups saw these new guidelines, suggested guidelines, and they were very upset about them, they pushed back and change happened. Okay, so that's the only reason really to get into the pricing discussion. So Before I hand this over to Lauren, I'm just going to talk to you briefly about some really important changes that, again, have been influenced by persistent patient advocacy and families doing this work that are minimizing delays between a new drug's regulatory approval in this country and a reimbursement recommendation to the public drug plans. So in recent years, like last, let's say 3 years, manufacturers have had the option to request something called an aligned or a parallel review of a qualifying submission in partnership with Health Canada and one of the HTA bodies, and Lauren's going to talk about that in a minute. I know that's another acronym. So that HTA body is called CDA now. It began accepting submissions up to 180 days before an anticipated regulatory decision, which enabled their recommendation to be made much more quickly, okay, between 3 and 28 days after approval, which is incredible. It used to take way, way longer. So some drugs started to go through that process over the last few years, but not enough. And so what happened was CDA basically said, you know what, we need to do better. We need to have something better. And patient group said, we need you to do better. And so they came up with Target Zero. And that's a new initiative that was just launched last year, and that aims to further improve patient access, the time that it takes for patients to access a drug, okay? Getting it down to 0 days. So that's what the goal is. And we're seeing it happen. It's really an incredible program. All right, and I think it's now time to hand it over to Lauren, and she's going to walk us through the HTA process.
All right, thank you. So I get the exciting part of today's, well, not that all of government process isn't riveting, but I'm here to talk to you guys about Canada's HTA, or Health Technology Assessment. So this is the process, and you actually may recall that as a community you went through this process very recently. So in Canada, there are 2 agencies which conduct these HTA reviews. Canada's Drug Agency, or CDA, which used to be called CADTH, they conduct reviews for all of Canada, except for Quebec. In Quebec, the process is run by INES, which I'll get into in a couple of slides. But we're going to begin by talking about CDA. So CDA conducts reimbursement reviews of clinical effectiveness, cost effectiveness, as well as patient and clinician perspectives on a drug that's going through review. At the end, they issue a non-binding recommendation, and that's really important. This is just a recommendation that goes to all of Canada's federal, provincial, and territorial governments, with the exception of Quebec, to guide their funding decisions. So I'm just going to repeat that again. It's a recommendation that guides. There are further steps that Joanne is going to review in a couple of slides. So the recommendations that can come out include that the drug be reimbursed, the drug is reimbursed with conditions or criteria, or that the drug not be reimbursed. One thing that I want to note is that almost all drugs that go through this process come out with a recommendation to reimburse with criteria or conditions, and that is usually around a reduction in price. So this is something that you should keep in mind as we touch on some of the private coverage later in the presentation. And as Joanne mentioned off the top, this is one of the only opportunities for formal patient advocacy. And I'm going to touch on what that advocacy looks like over the next couple slides, which now it's not working for me. Okay, CDA stakeholder input. So as part of its process, CDA invites patients and clinicians, so patient community and the clinician community, to provide their input and perspective on the drug going through review, as well as speak to the nature of the disease and existing treatments. So this is a vital opportunity. This is a really, really key chance for you as a community to provide your perspective and speak to the lived reality of the disease and make sure your experiences are considered. This is an opportunity to really put that face, that person, that real lived experience in front of decision makers who look at data and, facts and figures. This is the heart and the face. So for CDA, there are two opportunities for stakeholder input. The first happens during the reimbursement review itself. So established patient and clinician groups are able to provide their perspective on the drug under review. There are templates to use, which I'm going to show you over the next slides, but importantly to note is that individual patients and caregivers cannot comment directly. You can participate in the patient group submission, contribute to it, but you can't participate as an individual. The second CDA stakeholder input is once draft recommendations are published. So once those recommendations are published, patient and clinician groups are given 10 days only to review them and provide any feedback they might have. This is generally done by the patient groups who submitted the initial feedback, but not exclusively. So now we're going to review the templates. So here's a quick look at what the patient input template looks like. And I'm not going to go through detail, but what we wanted to show is that it provides an opportunity to share the patient's experience with the disease, current treatment, what they would like to see achieved by new treatments, and their perspective on the actual drug under review. I haven't clicked. Thank you, Joe. I'm too busy going through my notes. I just want to note that we're using the word patient because that is the language used in these templates, and we're just reflecting it back. Here's a quick snapshot of the CDA clinician input submission. So you will see it focuses on clinical experience, asking a bit more about current treatments, where there are gaps in care, and how the new therapy would fit into a treatment environment. Lastly, here's a snapshot of the draft recommendations feedback template. So this is the same template is used by patients and clinicians, and the document is set up as yes or no questions. So do you agree with the draft recommendations? Yes or no, and then with an option to provide comments. So you could say, yes, I agree, but here are some reasons or some considerations I want you to think about. Or, no, I don't agree, and this is why, etc. So this wraps up CDA, and now I'm going to touch on INESS. So as previously mentioned, Quebec has its own process for conducting an HDA review called INESS. Similar to CDA, INESS reviews a drug for therapeutic value and cost effectiveness. But unlike CDA, INESS recommendations do not go to all federal, provincial, and territorial governments. It only goes to the formulary in Quebec to be signed off by the Minister of Health. So they too provide an opportunity for stakeholder input with just some key differences from CDA. INESS stakeholder input is also open to patient and clinician groups, but individuals can also contribute directly to INESS stakeholder input. There's also only one opportunity to provide input, and that is while the drug is under review. There are no draft recommendations to provide feedback on at INESS, and there is no template provided for clinicians, which is interesting. So I'm going to show you a quick look at the patient and caregiver template. So as you can see, it follows a very similar line of questions and sections to the CDA template, asking about disease experience, currently available treatments, and the experience of the drug under review. The key difference is that the INESS template asks for 5 statements summarizing your input, and also it's the same template used by groups and individuals. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Joanne, and she's going to review the final steps in the reimbursement process once CDA has made their recommendation. Right, Joe?
Great. Thanks, Lauren. So it's a lot. We realize that, and it just may seem sort of not important at the moment, but all of these processes are extremely important for communities to understand and to be able to take part in. So we're almost there. So the second last step in the public reimbursement process is called PCPA, or the Pan-Canadian Alliance, Pharmaceutical Alliance. And so this body conducts joint reimbursement negotiations with 19 federal, provincial, and territorial drug plans. So all drugs with a positive CDA recommendation are considered for negotiation through PCPA. And when those negotiations are determined to take place, a lead jurisdiction is assigned, sometimes more than one. Now, this is something that is not transparent to the public. So you can imagine if you have a drug that is going through this process, it's important to you, and you want to do something about it, you want to talk to somebody about it, you will not know who's leading these negotiations, okay? That's the first thing that is not transparent. The second thing that's not transparent is who is sitting around the PCPA table, okay? So you have 19 different drug plans that could be participating in these negotiations, but you will not know, none of us will know, because we go on the PCPA website, it does not say who has agreed to sit around the table, okay? And we won't know at the end who signs off on an agreement. So it's a bit of a black box, that's what we call it. And so just so you know, the people who participate in these processes are the 13 provincial and territorial drug plans, also the Government of Canada through its 6 drug plans, and that includes veterans, RCMP, people who are on federal correctional institutions, and others. Okay. Let's move on and take a look at the actual process that PCPA follows. So basically, you see a flow chart on the right-hand side, but in a nutshell, there are 4 steps, okay? PCPA initiates the process, thinks about whether it wants to consider negotiating. It considers that, and then when it decides to enter into negotiations, it lets the manufacturer know by sending an engagement letter, okay? And then they assign that lead jurisdiction. And then the last step is they complete the negotiations. And so there are 2 outcomes to that, either a positive outcome, and that's a letter of intent, which is signed by everybody, or they conclude negotiations without an agreement. Okay, so those are the 2 outcomes that can happen. And like CDA, PCPA has also been making efforts to shorten the time frame that all of this happens, and that's why it's important for patient groups to sort of be on top of this, because they don't publish their timelines. It always takes too long, and so we need to, make sure that they know that we need it to take less time. So one time-saving initiative that was recently announced just this month is called the early negotiation process, and that does give an opportunity for drugs to go faster, except right now it's only being applied to cancer drugs, and so this is another opportunity for advocacy. Rare disease groups should definitely be pounding on PCPA's door and saying, we need you to look at our drugs through this process. And so finally, we've reached the last step, yay. And we're going to talk about product listing agreements, which happen at the very end of this process. Okay, so each of the 19 public drug programs that I just mentioned conduct their own review and negotiations on a particular drug with the manufacturer to determine ultimately if they are going to pay for this drug. Okay, so all that other stuff happened, and then this is the end. This is the final step. Some jurisdictions invite patients or patient groups to participate at this point and share more input. And so you got to take advantage of that, right? It's out there. BC is one of those provinces. They have something called Patient Voice. You can see it on their website. So a jurisdiction's health authority, usually the Minister of Health, is the ultimate decision maker. And that is who will decide whether or not their drug plan in their province or territory is going to cover a drug. And that, unfortunately, can vary from province to province. And we call that affectionately the postal code lottery, right? So it depends where you live if you're going to get access to a particular drug in this country. So we have to be mindful of that. And then lastly, some jurisdictions have special committees that they assign if a drug isn't listed on a general formulary. That is often the case with rare disease drugs. Then you have something called exceptional access. In Ontario, we have the EAP program that will determine whether or not people will get access to that drug. So we've got a product listing agreement, but it depends on a couple of things as to which pathway it's going to go through. So the key takeaway here is that public drug plans have no requirement or negotiation requirement to negotiate or to sign a PLA, all right, coming out of PCPA. So even if they've signed it, then there is no time frame for this process, as we talked about, and also it takes as long as it takes. And that is why advocacy is needed. And so we, do all the work that we do, we get to the end, and then we still have a little bit more work to do to make sure that this drug is going to get funded. All right. This is why. So now, some of you in this room are going to have private coverage, private plans. Does anybody you have that pathway? Yeah. Okay, so many of us through our employers will have private coverage. So that's something that we're going to talk about just really briefly. And manufacturers also negotiate product listing agreements on the private side. And we're going to look at that at a very high level. And full disclosure, we are not private payer experts. But we do work with someone who's amazing and knows all about this stuff. Her name is Suzanne Lepage, and she allowed us to use a couple of her slides to share with you on this topic. So, private coverage pathway starts with the manufacturer making drug reimbursement submissions to about 25 different private plans, private insurers, okay? You may have heard of some of them: Manulife, Sun Life, Medivie, Blue Cross. There's a bunch of them, some big, some small. The desired outcome of each submission is a PLA, a product listing agreement, just like we saw on the public side. And then the drug will be added to the payer's formulary, the insurance company's formulary. From there, each patient's drug claim is assessed or adjudicated based on the patient's private plan. And then that determines whether or not you're going to get covered for it. And often this will happen at the pharmacy. You're standing there, you get your prescription filled, and then you're told whether or not you've got coverage, right? Always a tense moment. But some plans have an additional step, which is called prior authorization. And that is if a drug is not listed on, it can be listed on the formulary in the case of private coverage, but it may need to go one more step, and that is like an exceptional access program type of thing, but for private. So sometimes that happens, and that happens often with specialty drugs. So as you can probably guess, patients, parents, families are not invited to share your stories or your input in any of this, that happens on the private side. But that doesn't mean that you can't do it, and certainly many people will do it once they are declined for coverage, and that's called informal advocacy. All right. One more slide, and then we're done. Okay, so there are two sort of aspects to private coverage, just like public coverage. We have market access, and we have patient access. And so when we talk about market access, that means a drug getting listed on a formulary of a private payer, and that's only the first step, right? And so the drug can be listed, as we just talked about, but the plan design will determine whether or not you're actually going to get covered, okay? And so that means that your employer has chosen a plan design that meets their needs, and depending on the design of that plan, you will or you will not get coverage, and no two plans are the same, right? So that's the other thing to keep in mind. So there's a couple of things that will influence plan design, like there'll be a plan maximum. You guys probably know about that. Like after a year, you can only have a certain amount covered. There could be a provincial mimic plan, which means the plans will follow what the province is doing, which is also important to know. That's why you need advocacy. And there could be somebody externally to the insurer who's saying, okay, well, let's try and save some money and do some different things. And so lots of stuff that can happen on the private side as well. But there are certainly opportunities informally for people to sort of share their voices and their experiences, and that's a topic for another day. All right, we got there. Thank you for staying awake. We've covered a lot, and we're just going to do a really quick summary, and then we're also going to talk about the most important thing, which is where and why your voice matters in advocacy. Okay. Let's go back to the slide from the very beginning of the presentation. You can see on this version, we've got some time frames added. And so now that you understand all of these processes, well, I know you've heard about all of these processes, you'll see that it won't surprise you that this is going to take about 2 to 3 years, okay, from Health Canada all the way to patient access. So it takes time. And this is exactly why advocacy is so important, right? You don't have time. We don't have time. None of us want to wait for these treatments. And so we want to be able to do advocacy as much as possible. So the question that I want to ask you right now, it's not a trick question, where do you think your voice matters in all of these different processes? Just shout it out. Where? At what point in all of these processes do you think your voice?
I will just voice it everywhere because these people who are deciding, they're still people and they still see the news. You can still reach them.
You got it. Yeah, exactly. So that was a quick a quick way to get to the answer, and so that is 100% right. 100% right. Everywhere.
Sorry.
Ju-
Oh, someone's asking. Can you
Yep,
repeat?
sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, the answer? Yeah. Let's see if we can. Oh,
I'm sorry, I kind of like jumped you there. I just said everywhere at any time because it's not a robot, it's not a computer who's deciding it. It's people who are living their life and they are sitting at the table and they're living their life. And then if they have a friend or anyone, they can hear our voices all the time, even though there is no space for those voices, like in the process. But these people are hearing us, so we just need to be loud.
absolutely. Does anybody have any other comments around that where your voice can be heard? That just sums it up perfectly. Thank you so much for that. All right. So in conclusion, whether you're being asked for your input, which happens rarely, as we've just heard, or you're offering it in the form of advocacy, your voice matters, your stories matter, your experience matters. And it's all those things are critical to all of these processes, and that's why they're important to be aware of and to understand, right? Advocacy is about empowerment, first and foremost, and it allows you to make your voices heard through taking action to create meaningful change about things that matter to you and your families. And you can do this in a couple of different ways. That's bringing your perspectives and your experiences forward about these important issues, building relationships with decision makers and influencers who can ultimately become cause champions for you, who can stand beside you and fight for what you need. And by positioning you and organizations like Defeat Duchenne Canada as trusted partners in bringing about the changes that you need. All right. So, maybe this is good news. There are going to be 2 more advocacy webinars coming because this was a lot. This is the heavy stuff, guys, right? This is just that baseline knowledge that's good to know before we get into the how. How can you do this work? How can you have your voices heard? And so there's a bunch of topics we're going to be covering. I'm not going to cover them all here, but certainly if there's anything that anybody wants us to talk about and get into, let Nicola know, and we're happy to modify our presentations. All right, do we have, I've completely lost track of time. Do we have time for a little Q&A? Okay, perfect. All right, should we just open the floor to questions then? Okay.
Hi. Is it on? Okay. We're from Quebec, and I'm just curious because you said, there's a CDA, there's INESS, sorry, thank you. Is there ever a drug or something that's not approved by, like CDA will approve it and Quebec not approve it, or usually are they across the board?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So there are times where you will get a positive recommendation from CDA and a negative from INESS or vice versa. And that's another opportunity where advocacy comes into play, talking about that inequality across provinces or, however you do choose to advocate around that. But we have seen it happen, and it does. It's not guaranteed that they'll be the same, but then both or all the provinces will come back together at that PCPA table.
Okay. And is there ever like a major treatment that is not approved across Canada? Like just in general, or is there some provinces will opt out sometimes?
So you're from reimbursing the therapy?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where Joanne was sort of speaking to. There is no requirement, like once you come out of PCPA, a province may sign that agreement, the LOI, lots of acronyms we know, and they still may not decide to reimburse it in their province. or they may take years to reimburse it in their province. And so, as we'll touch on in some of the future webinars, but also as we started talking about today, that's where your voice and your advocacy is going to play a role in trying to convince your province you need to reimburse it. We don't want the postal code lottery in this community. We want equity. It shouldn't matter where we live. We should all have access.
Gotcha.
And just to say, it's happened. We've seen it happen, and you can do it. You can turn over decisions, and it is possible.
I would like to know. It's on. I would like to know if the process is the same for gene therapy, where it may cost over $1 million per treatment. Is the process the same?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and so that's been something new in the last few years. It is more or less the same process, and it is certainly even more difficult, to convince payers of the value, because it's usually one and done at a very high cost for the one treatment. So it is more or less the same process. Yes.
Hello? Oh.
Yes.
You mentioned speaking to decision makers and getting your voice out there. Who would those decision makers be? Is it MPs, MPPs, councillors? Is it bureaucratic? How do I identify those decision makers?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So we'll get into that definitely in more detail in the coming webinars. But in short, Health Canada approves treatments. Okay, so if you're concerned about the approval process of a treatment, allowing it to be sold in Canada, that's your MP, right? Your member of Parliament in Ottawa, right? Federal, exactly. Everything else after that, for the most part, is the provinces and the territories. Okay, so that then you shift gears to your MPP, your MLA, your MNA, MHA, whatever we call them in our various provinces. And they're the ones who matter at that point. So everything after Health Canada, you shift your advocacy focus to the provincial or territorial level.
Sorry, quick question about the paying out of pocket. So does it mean it's faster? And if it's faster, how fast can it be if we want to pay out of our pocket?
Yeah, that's another great question. So as soon as a drug is approved in Canada, it is able to be sold in this country. Okay, so once the manufacturer makes the drug available, which usually takes a few months after approval, could be longer, then we are able to purchase that drug. Okay, and so I think that answers, yeah. After Health Canada. So as soon as that's right. As soon as a drug is approved in this country, it is approved for sale, and it can be sold. Right?
I wasn't quite sure what you meant by a patient group as far as the DMD community is concerned. Would that be Defeat Duchenne Canada or something else?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
So my question is sorry. Okay. So my question is regarding that, for example, in case of vamorolone, right? The approval process or the submission by the companies in Europe, UK, and the US was way ahead of time as compared to Canada, right? It took us almost 2 extra years to be at a point where we are today, right? What do you think is the gap here that the companies are not submitting the application for approval here at the same time as they would be submitting in Europe, UK, which UK has the same public health care, right? So what do you think is the gap and how we can kind of encourage the companies to do that, right? For example, Dyne is now submitting in the States, right? And then some of the trials have been done here as well. So what is really happening that it is not being submitted here?
That is a really great question, and that is a conversation that we have also been engaging with a lot of our farmer partners. And typically what happens is a lot of the companies will submit to the FDA first. Sometimes that happens, they'll submit to the EMA, which is the European agency that's equivalent to the Health Canada in Europe. And that could happen shortly thereafter. And absolutely, I understand the frustration as Canadians because often we wait for that drug to come to Canada, and often it never does, and they never make a submission. And so it's something that we are all very much aware of, and we continue to ensure that our voices are heard on that, and continue to encourage companies to try and submit to Canada as soon as they can. The thing is that each of these agencies has their own rules and regulations or own processes as well. Many of these companies, too, are also smaller biotech companies that just don't have the resources to be able to or can, do it in all places all at once. It's not that their intent isn't there. It is that they're just not able to. But all of this is stuff that we're trying to understand a little bit better as well, and understand how we can continue to partner with our partners to find out, how can we improve this process, and how can we ensure. We talk about postal code lottery, but I mean, this is a global phenomenon. Like, it doesn't matter where you live in the world. Duchenne is Duchenne wherever you live, and so it is a very visible inequity that exists, and it's something that we feel very passionate about and continue to have conversations about.
Just to follow up what you just said, so I went to a core conference last year because this was exactly my question. I was trying to understand why our Canadian market is not attractive enough for the pharmaceutical company to come in here, and what I got from that conference, and I am probably wrong because that's just my own thinking, and I'm no engineer or anything like that, but I understood that the submission to the Health Canada comes with the monetary cost to submit with them to come in. So like, you're taking a drug and then you have to pay to even submit. So that's going after the manufacturer, that cost.
Yeah.
What is that cost relevant? Is that cost reflecting? Because if you are already putting a monetary blockage, then that blockage, you're essentially you're driving the cost higher for the patients and the end of it. Mm-hmm. Does it have to be there? Does it have to be that high? That was my thought processes, and I don't know the answer still, but yeah.
It's a very good question, a very insightful question, but it's only part of it, right? And I mean, that is an area we could advocate and say, hey, why do we need to have that in place? But it's more than just that, right? It takes resources within an organization to do that. They need, personnel. They need to hire folks to do that. They need to even understand what our process is and have experts who understand how to navigate that process. So the monetary part of it goes beyond just the fee that they'd have to pay to make a submission. So it is quite complex in that sense. But I was going to say something else, and it just left my mind. But yeah, no, it's a very good question.
The problem with that is that the fee, it's kind of confusing, because if you have a drug that's COVID vaccine, that's going to go after millions and millions of people. Well, that fee should be different for at that moment than if it's going to 5 patients.
Yeah.
And I don't know the clarity of that, how that fee is being billed, how if it's updated, if it's reflecting the market and the needs of the society, and I just don't understand that process, and I don't know who does, but I'm kind of digging my hands into it because it feels a little sketchy. But
no, I love
it.
Yeah. I love it. I love that you're there. I will say, though, that for quite some time, the Canadian drug approval process has been viewed as being very complicated and very complex, and sometimes that can be a deterrent for companies to say, well, we just don't understand this, and it's going to take too long from the point to where we, make a submission to the point where, we can actually get our drug reimbursed. But as Joanne and Lauren have talked about, there's been a lot of advocacy, and CORD has been a part of that. Our rare disease community have been, I don't know if you've been, keeping tabs on this over the last few years, but even the last 5 years. There's a rare disease strategy that's come on board. I think Dr. Campbell talked a little bit too yesterday about the money that the government had. There was, I can't remember now, it was like something, $1 billion that we have, oh gosh, why am I blanking on the number, but the government had said we'll invest in rare disease drugs, and I can tell you that Duchenne was not on that list. And so some drugs were, on the radar of, we have money, we can put some funds towards it. Duchenne was not on that list. So, I mean, my commitment to you in this community is that we're no longer going to wait for permission. We're not going to wait for people to come and ask us we're going to be proactive about this, right? We're going to ensure that, as you said, our voice is not just at all parts of the process, but at all parts from the conception to when a drug is in, thinking about going into clinical trial, all the way up until this point where we can get access to families. This is our mission. This is a big part of our mission now, and it's an important one, and it's important that all of you are involved in this. We talk about when we talk about our mission and advocacy, we talk about timely. We talk about equitable, affordable access to medications. It's timely because time is muscle, right? It's equity because we want all Canadians who can benefit from a drug be able to access a drug. We don't want to wait for that drug. And affordable, right? These drugs have to be, affordable so that not only can we afford them, but our government can afford to give a positive recommendation and cover these drugs. So all of these are important pieces, and if you're not if you're not subscribing to our newsletter, make sure you do, because that's going to be our form of communicating with our community about the work that we are doing, and when we want to call on you to participate. So you'll start to see that a lot of our outreach is going to ramp up. We are, ramping up our advocacy efforts. And so if we may need to send out surveys to our community and say, hey, we need your input on this, because we're going to put together, our patient submission to one of these processes. Or we may be reaching out to you individually and saying, hey, we want you to come and give us your stories, or we want your personal input on your thoughts and feelings about these treatments and that process. So all of this is going to be really, really important for us moving forward. So, but on that note of the reimbursement, did you guys want to comment on that at all about the payment?
You've done an excellent job.
Any more questions
Yes.
before we move on?
I think we said we have 5 minutes.
Okay, John.
This, I think, is the first family forum that we've had where there has been a drug available in Canada. That did not happen at the previous family forums. So you've all done a great deal of work to make that possible. All your efforts have brought us to the point we're at today. But now we are at a critical juncture where we're changing thrust and moving into advocacy. And ladies, you've given us a tremendous amount of homework, but no textbook. So we need to be able to look at the material you have and have it imprinted in our heads to speak to our friends, our family, our coworkers, our colleagues, and speak to them accurately so that there's no wondering what that meant, and be able to provide answers. So with that, that's a long bit of stuff, but what I'm asking is, can we have access to the exact slides that you have so we know this material cold?
Absolutely.
And that we can quote it word for word and explain where the difficulties are and what we are trying to accomplish. So how do we get access to your material that you've had this morning, which I think has been a heavy dose of homework, but a load of homework that I think we all are going to cherish and be willing to take home so we can make use of it and as quickly as possible, because time is muscle.
Yeah, the slides are yours.
Yeah, slides are yours.
Thank you, John. Yeah, absolutely. And as we go through the next few webinars that we hope that you'll join us for, this will all become a little bit more clear in your minds, I think, too, because you'll see, where what you can do within those opportunities. You know, action is always easier to sort of wrap your head around than, you know, the theoretical stuff that we've just shared with you today. So, yeah, absolutely. You'll have the slides. They will be yours. And there will be a quiz, Mr. Davidson, so get ready.
But you'll see how this theory becomes such an important foundation, you know, especially in understanding as we move into the next steps and understanding who our targets are per the question, you know, who do we advocate to at what level of government? Hopefully, as you absorb more of this theory, you'll come to understand, you know, Health Canada approval being one step at federal and then where we hit the provinces and all those other pieces that happen once a drug is approved. Because I think a message that I hope you take from this that a lot of family and friends won't understand is approval doesn't mean access. And so what these next webinars will touch on is how we advocate for that access.
And I just want to say one other thing too is, oh, sorry. You don't want to leave that there? No?
It's a really nice one.
I almost had a laptop. No. The other thing, John, I just wanted to add to all of that as well is, you know, Defeat Duchenne Canada, we are here to take that burden off of you as well. The expectation here is that not all of you need to be an expert in the drug approval process and when this all matters. So this is why this, you know, lean on our organization for this. We will be coming to you and letting you know when we need you, we need your voices to be part of this process. And so I just wanted to make that clear too. The expectation here is that you all have to be experts in this, and you need to know when you're going to do what. We're going to be putting together, you know, toolkits and playbooks and instructions for families so they understand who they need to speak to, what should they be speaking about, what is our messaging around, you know, how we want to access treatment. So all of that is part of our plan moving forward, and part of the work that we're going to be doing. So there's a lot of work ahead. We will do the heavy lifting. And your job and only your job is to tell us how you feel about it and share your story where it matters and you know, with impact. And we can help you do that as well. Just a bit of a plug as well is that we will be hiring an advocacy position at Defeat Duchenne Canada. So if you know anybody who may be interested in joining that work and taking on that, it's going to be a highly rewarding job, we hope, but also it's a lot of work ahead. So if you know somebody who may be interested, let me know. That's something that you will be hearing from us in the coming weeks and months to fulfill that position. And we're also working very closely with these lovely and very knowledgeable ladies. So we're very excited to have some support in that area as well. So, yep, yeah. No.
I'm sorry. I feel like for me, it would be very helpful if I would have an email coming from Defeat Duchenne. They would be like, hey, Nicole, this is a good time right now to connect with your MLIA. And this is the email, how it could look like. So I will just go copy-paste the sections that I need to use. Then I will do my little something. And then that's how I can send it to them, right? At least like for the email portion. Yep. And just like that would be very helpful for me, I feel.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, and that will all come. I noticed we have our QR code up there too. If you are interested in becoming more involved, not just as a job with Defeat Duchenne Canada, but beyond that as a family member, if you do want to be involved more, please let us know. Because, like I said, the more, more hands make light weight. So there's a lot of work to do, and I'm very encouraged by the way things are going. And I think John mentioned this yesterday too, is vamorolone is the first, right? This is our first step. We've made a really big step in these last few weeks, and there's more to come. And so we need to prepare the landscape for that, and that's really big part of our work moving forward. So thank you so much, ladies. I really appreciate it. This is really great. Thank you.